excited that Bob let me do this, because it's just, I love the saints. I love the saint series because it introduces you to saints that you don't know. Now, you all are much more familiar with the saints. This is new for me, so it's really kind of risky that Bob let me get up here. Because I've only been familiar with the saints for the past couple of years, like 5 years or so, since I started at the spiritual direction practicum. But I love the saints because they give us different perspective on connecting to God, and they give us different ways of fleshing out Jesus to one another. And so to me, studying the saints is just really exciting. After I finished the practicum, you know, during the practicum you have to study a spiritual giant for 2 years, and I loved that practice so much, and it meant so much to me that I've continued to do it for the past 6 years, I think is how long I've been out. But anyway, so I love studying the saints, and when I got Elizabeth Ann Seton, I didn't know her at all. And so I started out by watching a movie about her. And when we got to the end, I went, uh-oh, what was that? I thought, nice story, nice lady. What am I supposed to learn from this? You know, I was completely perplexed. And so I thought, well, I better read a book. So I read a book, and I was still just stumped. I thought, I don't get it. So being a good Dominican, I went and read a couple more books and got online and studied, watched some YouTubes and read a few articles, and I hate to say it, guys, but I was stumped. I just wasn't getting it. And at that point, this is back, probably back in December, and at that point I was going, should I call Bob and tell him that maybe you should find somebody else? But that's not usually how I roll, so I just kept thinking and studying, and then I thought, oh, I could pray about this. And so that's what Dominicans do, right? They study, they pray, they study, they pray. Okay, so I prayed about it, and I said, God, I don't get this lady. I don't get why she was made a saint. And please teach me what I'm supposed to learn, right? So I prayed about it, and God came through. So I do have something to share with you tonight. So I'm excited about that. When I think about Saint Elizabeth, she has such a long name, Elizabeth Ann Bailey Seton. What set her apart for me was that she was really devoted to what she called the will. Okay, that would be the will of God. She was devoted to the will. And whenever anything good happened, she's like, it's the will of God. When anything bad happened, it's the will of God. She was devoted to the will. She accepted it, she embraced it, she savored it, she loved the will of God because she loved God. And when you came in today, I hope everybody got a little paper. Because the first prayer on this paper was not written by Elizabeth Ann Seton, but I think it reflects her attitude toward the will. Okay, so I'm just going to read it, or actually I'm going to pray it, and you can read along or you can pray it with me. It says this: Lord, I am willing. I am willing to receive what you give, to release what you take, to lack what you withhold, to do what you require, to be what you desire. Lord, I am willing. Isn't that a beautiful prayer? To take the will of God and just say, I'm willing, Lord, whatever it is, to receive what you have. I'm willing to release whatever it is that you take. And you're going to find out that she had a lot of things to release. She went through a lot of grief. She was willing to lack whatever he withheld. She just simply trusted her Heavenly Father to take care of all her needs. So I should probably give you some background on her story now, because that's what you came for, right? She was born in New York, right about the time that our country was born, in 1774, 2 years before the independence of our country. And she was a privileged kid. She was one of the rich kids in town. Her dad was a doctor, and so she was well-to-do. She was educated, well provided for, and her father, as a doctor, worked long hours. Okay, he was gone a lot, and a lot of times he would travel extensively to other countries to learn more about doctoring, and so she missed her dad a lot, and she was very lonely as a little kid, especially because her mom died when she was just a little girl. And according to the custom back then, their wife would die during childbirth or sickness or whatever. The men would get married right away. They didn't wait like 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. They would get married right away because they had to have someone to watch over the babies, right? The kids. So he got married right away, and his new wife was not very taken with Elizabeth. By the way, her nickname was Betty. Isn't that kind of neat? My name is Elizabeth also, so I've never been Betty though. Anyway, it was hard on her because she could sense that her stepmom didn't really embrace her as her own. And so she was very lonely and found her comfort in books. Maybe she was a Dominican of sorts. She was a voracious reader. She loved novels and poetry and religious literature. She was very devout from a young age, very devout. Her family was Episcopalian. Excuse me. Her family was Episcopalian. All of her friends, all of her neighbors, they were all Episcopalians. But she enjoyed reading religious literature from other faith denominations, okay? So, and she loved like the Methodist hymns. Of course, like who doesn't? They're so great. Those Methodist hymns are so rich. She loved the quietism of the Quakers, and she loved that evangelical push of the Calvinists, and she just adopted, she kind of adopted all those practices. But she was always very devoted to the scripture. She read the scripture every day and loved it, loved it, loved it. And a woman after my own heart, because I also love the scripture, which is probably why I'm going away to be a teacher at a Bible school. Anyway, she loved the scripture. She was also tremendously devoted to the Lord's Supper, the real presence, okay? Anyway, I'll get more about that a little bit later. Elizabeth was really beautiful, and she was witty and charming, and she was a real catch. You know, she's devoted to the Lord, she's really intelligent, and so most of the men, the eligible bachelors, came courting, but she fell in love with one man, William Seton. And they were married. They were deeply in love, and they had 5 children. Really fast. I have 6 children, okay? And they had their 5 children in just a very short time. They had, I think, they had one every year or every year and a half, so it was a busy household. Sometime in there, William's father passed away and left him in charge of all of the siblings, all of William's siblings. There were 7 of them. 2 of them were nearly raised, but there were 5 siblings that came into the household. So Elizabeth had to take care of her 5 kids and the 5 siblings. I can't even imagine how busy that household must have been. Crazy. But in the midst of all of that, you could think that she got an attitude or whatever, and I'm sure that it was a struggle. but she submitted to the will. She went, well, this is the will of God, and so she took it on, and she did what was required of her. So after, when William's dad passed away, he left the children to William, and then also the family business. And then catastrophe hit. The family business went belly up. He had to file for bankruptcy, and then his health started to diminish. He got tuberculosis. I don't think they knew that it was tuberculosis at that time. They called it Seton's complaint because so many of the Setons had that in the family, was tuberculosis. But anyway, they lost the family business, and then her husband got really sick. Again, another time when she just entrusted herself to the will of God. Amazing. So, because of his health, they decided to take a trip over to Italy because the climate was milder. So they wanted to go off to Italy, and when they got there, he was very sick. And there was a rumor that yellow fever had broken out in New York, which is where they came from. So they wouldn't let them get off the ship. And then it got to be, they figured he'd start feeling better, and he didn't. And so then they said, well, we can't keep you on the ship forever, so we're going to put you in a cell right there on the coast. And it was very cold. They literally locked them up and quarantined them in this cell for months. It was cold, it was dark, it was boring, and it was lonely. And I just can't believe it. Like, she would read the scripture to her husband every day, and she kept her kids happy. And I just can't imagine being locked up in a cell for that long. And the other thing that added to it was so cold and so damp that it didn't help his tuberculosis at all. He didn't get better. In fact, he died. He passed away. And then they kept them in confinement for a certain amount of time and then let them loose because then, of course, they didn't have yellow fever. But when they came out of quarantine, they went and stayed with William's family friends, the Felicis. The Felicis were Catholic, and that's where she really got to know the Catholic faith. She had read about it, but she didn't know many Catholics because her entire community was Episcopalian. So she saw in the Felicis Catholicism lived out. And they had like a private chapel in their home, and she was really smitten with the idea of the real presence in the Eucharist. She was fascinated by that, and she really believed it. And so she, just a side note, at that time, the Book of Common Prayer, which is the book that they use in the Episcopalian Church, it got revised. And they changed the wording on what communion is all about. So let me see, it says, before the revision, it said of the Lord's Supper, the body and blood of Christ is literally and indeed taken and received by the faithful. Okay? After the revision, it said the body and blood are spiritually taken and received by the faithful. For Elizabeth, that was a deal breaker. Okay? She just couldn't abide by that. And that caused her to make the shift and convert to Catholicism. So at this time, she's still over in Italy. She's buried her husband. She has to leave him there. And then she comes back to the United States, and then she becomes a Catholic. Now, in the United States at that time, the Catholics were kind of like on the other side of the tracks. They were immigrants, lowlifers, ruffians, and here she is, a well-read woman who's educated, and she goes over and, you know, they're having fights, and they beat up the priest one time. She had to break up a brawl, you know, and I'm like, whoa, okay? The other thing I forgot to tell you about the Felicis, when her husband died, Mrs. Felici, Signora Felici, thought she should be dressed appropriately according to the custom in Italy. So she brought her the widow's garb, which was the black dress, the black mantle, and the black widow's cap. Everybody's nodding. Yeah. The black widow's cap became kind of her trademark, and also part of the habit of the sisters of her community. But that's where it came from. So in the United States, it looked a little like, that's a funky looking hat. But in Italy, that was the widow's cap that identified her. So that's where that came from. Okay. When she became a Catholic, her friends were horrified. They were trying to be nice because she had just lost her husband, but they were horrified, and some of them shunned her and ostracized her, and they were mean to her, and sadly to say, her pastor encouraged them to do so, because he really felt like she's wayward. We need to make her shape up before she ships out, okay? So, what's that? Oh, I thought somebody asked. So anyway, they were not nice, okay? So when she came back, of course, she's got all these children to take care of, right? So she started a boarding house. But as soon as she converted, all of her friends bailed on her and said, we're not going to support you in that boarding house. And they maligned her. And they spread nasty rumors about her. And everyone left the boarding house. She couldn't support her family. And that's when she moved to Baltimore. She moved there, and while she was there, she started a little school called St. Joseph's Academy and Free School. It's so easy to read about her starting that school. Oh, she followed the Lord, and that was the will, and it was all hunky-dory. It was horrible. Because now it's like a boarding school, okay? And now she's responsible for her children and these other little children, and they're broke. They don't have enough money. They can't feed the kids. The kids are hungry. They're cold because they can't heat the building. It was really, really rough. Now, I don't know about you guys, but like, if I'm going through a rough thing, it's easier for me to trust the will, okay? I can trust God for myself, but watching my little ones, whoa, that is really tough. And yet she did. She trusted God through all of that. She assumed that God was using it to make them into the characters that they were supposed to be. So I just think that's amazing. So after a number of difficult years, she moved on to Emmitsburg, Maryland, and that's where she founded the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph's. And that was the first community for religious women in the United States, which is pretty amazing. From that time on, they called her Mother Seton, which is so much easier than saying Elizabeth Amelie Seton. So, Mother Seton, they called her, and in 1818, they made another school, and the sisters also started 2 orphanages.
Wow.
Yeah, pretty amazing. The community, I think I lost my place here, but the community, yes. Well, I don't have, oh yeah, 1809 is when they moved to Emmitsburg, and then 1812 is when she founded the Sisters of Charity of St. Joseph. So she wasn't there very long, and then in 1818, so things are clipping along at this point. She starts an order, and then in 1818, they add another school and 2 orphanages. Pretty amazing.
Sure.
Then, today, 6 groups of sisters can trace their origins back to Mother Seton's initial foundation. Mother Seton also was afflicted with tuberculosis. She became very sick, but she continued to guide at the school and with her community. She died at the age of 46, after only 16 years after she had become a Catholic. And she had done all of that in 16 years. It's pretty impressive. She was canonized on September 14, 1975 by Pope Paul VI, and her feast day is January 4th. Elizabeth Ann Seton, the thing that really hit, that has really encouraged me in my faith, is that she so trusted God. She knew that God had her back and was always doing good. It may not look good, it may not feel good, but she knew that God was working for her good, right? So I'd like to close tonight by praying that prayer on her. Actually, I think I'll just say it, and then you just kind of follow along. It's the second one on the page. I'll say it, and then you follow along, just reading it silently. It says, "Our Father, you would not willingly call on us to suffer. You say all things work together for our good if we are faithful to you. Therefore, if you ordain it through disappointment and poverty, sickness and pain, even shame and contempt and calumny, you will support us with the consolation of your grace and compensate us for any temporal suffering by the possession of that peace which the world can neither give nor take away." Amen. I think that is a beautiful, beautiful prayer, and I am so thankful that that God came through with the message. It's been particularly helpful for me right now because, as you heard, my husband and I are going as missionaries to Alaska. And, you know, you always think, well, God called me, so it's going to be a breeze. You know, why do we think that? We have all history to prove us wrong on that. It's not always a breeze. And yet, it's a good thing. You know, I can't wait to get up there. And I feel like I'm more equipped. Like, since I've been studying Mother Seton, I have noticed this serenity and this peace to be able to just go, oh yeah, I can just trust the Father on this. You know, that is a tremendous gift. And I thank God for Mother Seton. So I'm supposed to open up for questions, but I probably don't have any answers. But I'll give it a shot. Yeah.
Didn't her children also die?
Yes. I think she lost 2 of her children. Thank you, I forgot to say that. I think she lost one of them to tuberculosis, young. She wasn't even, I think she was, you know, an adolescent when she died. I think she lost 2 of her kids, maybe it was 1, but.
It was 2, yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
I just finished reading it, and so you hit on all the good points. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
But then didn't she started this one order, and then she got, didn't like the way it was set up or something, or did Rome contact her, or did you encounter that part of it?
No, I didn't. I don't remember that. But you know, because of my
And what are they called now?
According to my little sheet here, they are. Well, what did you say, Bob?
Sisters of Charity.
Sisters of Charity, which is not what I have down.
The Daughters of Charity?
Yeah. Yeah, that's. I think I have down something with St. Joseph.
St. Joseph's after school.
Yeah. And those are the kind of things that I'm not really tuned into, like how orders. You ladies would be much more familiar with that. For me, I go, yeah, they're going rah, 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 rah. So.
I was so proud of her that she was a married woman, and then to take this new life on in your hands, you know. My gosh, 2 different lives.
Yeah, that's completely different. And yet, I wonder if that didn't prepare her for, I mean, if you have 10 kids running around, remember they didn't have microwaves and laundromats and things like that. It probably prepared her for working with the children at the school and for the sisters too. You had a question?
Did she stay in contact with her own children after, do you know? Or-
Okay, the question was, did she stay in contact with her children? Her children kind of came and went. Some of them passed away, and then the boys, I think, one went into the military and one went off, and they had some contact, but not too much. So, any other questions?
What, oh, go ahead.
Well, it's just a comment. I like the way you approach your study and to say, what does this have to say to me or to us?
Well, thank you. For the people listening, she said, I like the way that you approach the study to see what it has to teach. Yeah, I was starting to get a little panicked there, and I was visualizing getting up here saying, yeah, Elizabeth Ann Seton lived and died, and let's go have some coffee and cookies. So I was getting worried there. Was there another question? Did you have another comment?
Yes, the comment that, why did she become a saint? You know, you're wondering. And I think that is the question, you know, what a sainthood means.
How did she achieve
Yeah.
sainthood, yeah?
Well, and that was confusing for me too. Again, I'm not real well versed in becoming a saint, but
She deserves it.
I think so. I think there was one miracle that was attributed to her, and then the other miracle that they attributed to her was what she did as far as the school and the convent. And so it wasn't like a miracle like, whoa, now I can see. I once was blind. It wasn't like that. It was that she did this tremendous work.
The humanity of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing I think is, you know, if we think of the context in which she lived, and then moving across culture to that immigrant kind of status from being Episcopalian, which was higher class.
Right.
You know, she really took care of the poor, you know, and that, you know, there were some social movements at that time, but not many.
Right.
And so she went and lived where they lived and worked where they worked, and, you know, it was crossing those boundaries,
Yes.
that sense of mission and compassion, I think. And also when you think of women, now I don't know how much of her wealth still was hers, or whether she genuinely experienced poverty. But if the business had gone belly up, then probably not much.
Right.
And so she was really, that trust in God was absolutely essential, because that's all there was.
It was essential. That is all that they had, because when her father passed away, his second wife, which was not her mother, insisted that he cut them from the will. Yeah, really nice lady. So they were stunned. At that time, they weren't living at home. They were living with a relative, but they were left with nothing. Yeah, and then when her husband went bankrupt, she was left with nothing again, which is harder because she came from such wealth and prominence, so yeah.
When was she canonized?
She was canonized, well, my notes are all messed up. Did anybody else?
Paul VI, yes.
Pope Paul VI, and for some reason I cannot find my notes.
Then my next question is, when,
Oh, yeah, I've
what
got
year
it.
did she die?
Okay, I got it now. She died in 1821, she was 46, and in 1975, she was canonized.
Sometimes it takes centuries upon centuries upon centuries to be
Right.
canonized. So the fact that that amount of time also shows.
Yeah, that's interesting. Mhm.
Yeah, I the animosity of her Christian friends.
Oh, yeah. I read someplace that later on her pastor, who was quite well known, he was a really smart guy and anyway, he apologized, but it was many years later he apologized because he kind of turned on her and asked her friends to shun her and give her the business. And they did, because they were following the pastor's orders. Religious people can be so sweet.
No.
Yeah.
Well, the other thing is she was one of those foreign Catholics who were trying to get the Pope over here to run the country, you know? I mean, they weren't, but that was the stereotypical view is, be careful of those Catholics, they'll bring the Pope over.
Yeah, there was a lot of suspicion.
You know, again, it's a political issue as well as a religious issue.
Yeah, yeah. Sister?
I just wondered if anybody else had been to Emmitsburg.
Oh, have you? How many have been to Emmitsburg? Oh, that's
It's
wonderful.
very nice.
Why aren't you up here?
I was 13.
Oh,